Hey everyone, welcome to Flashback Friday, part of our May is Bike Month with the City of Eugene Transportation, part of Public Works Engineering at the City of Eugene. And my name is Shane, and I'm excited to be here to talk a little bit about Eugene's bike history. So this is going to be a casual conversation, a little flashback of where we've come and where we're going around biking in Eugene. So we hope to have a good casual conversation with our guest and hopefully invite in some good comments and questions and discussions from people who are joining us on Facebook and YouTube, joining our live stream. And this is our last event for May is Bike Month around Transportation Tuesday and Flashback Friday events. We are hoping to continue some of these into June, but not hold them as frequently, and probably mostly just the Transportation Tuesday events. We have had a great response from folks so far and would like to encourage more people to come to those, and maybe as we hold them once or twice a month on different topics that people are interested in. We still have one that we are planning to do in a Spanish language version, talking about biking in general in Eugene, with some Spanish language speakers, and talk about the Latinx experience of cycling in Eugene. And we have some other pieces around infrastructure and different parts of biking and walking and skateboarding that people have asked about. And so we'll try and work those into some shows. I think we'll probably have a special edition of a Peace Health Rides update in the coming weeks, and maybe we'll do a little live stream event for that with some news around what's happening since we've heard about Uber's pullout from the system and what our plans are at the City of Eugene. So stay tuned for more on our Facebook and YouTube pages to see what topics we might discuss, and feel free to email or send us messages on either any of those platforms, or maybe today we can even talk about what some of those topics might be. Today I'm really excited to have with me Sue Wolling, and she has a great history of advocacy in Eugene, as well as recreation and transportation riding, and we're just going to have a little conversation about a bit of Eugene bike history, and we hope that you join in the conversation. Hey, Sue.
Hello.
Welcome.
Good to be here.
So I know that I met you when I moved back to Eugene. I was born here and then left for a while and came back to Eugene in 2007, and so we might have met in my early days at CAT. I don't really remember, back in the 90s. But when did you first start riding in Eugene?
I moved out here in 1988, and as soon as I got here, I kind of thought I had died and gone to heaven, because I looked around and there were normal people riding bikes, and there were bike lanes all over the place, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is not like St. Louis.
Yeah, and so when we met in 2007, one of the first projects that I know I worked on was GEARS, the Greater Eugene Area Riders, and the Eugene Bicycle Coalition were both active in some ways. GEARS had been the recreational ride group, and the Eugene Bicycle Coalition had sort of been the advocacy group, and I don't know how long they had been around, but it was in 2007 when we started to talk about merging those organizations, and around 2007, 2008 when we did that merging, and it was you and Richard Hughes and a couple other people that were involved with that. Wasn't that right?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what year that was. It's interesting to me that in many cities, bike clubs are both recreational for recreational riding and advocacy. That has never been a particularly comfortable fit here in Eugene for some reason, and I've never understood it.
Yeah.
I actually got involved with the back when there was a Eugene Bicycle Committee. I don't know what year it was. Shortly after I had moved here, actually, and it was kind of funny because I actually ended up getting involved because at the time I was working. I kind of wanted to get involved in the city somehow. I loved the city I had just moved to, and I was working swing shift. And well, the bicycle committee met at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's like I could do that. So I just started showing up, and it's like most things in Eugene. If you show up enough times, you're on. You know, so I was on that for a number of years, and then it finally the bicycle committee was disbanded by the city. Not anything against bicycling. It was just a budget cutting thing that they got rid of all of the committees that weren't required by law.
Right.
And
yeah, it was more of a staffing support.
Yeah, exactly. It took a certain amount of time of the department heads to deal with all the citizens' requests and things. Mm-hmm. And so we went for a couple of years, of just the city doing its stuff. And it finally started to seem like, gosh, there ought to be some kind of bike advocacy group in Eugene. So we started the Eugene Bicycle Coalition, and we're kind of trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? How do we do this? And the issue of the East Bank Trail was thrown into our laps. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a big deal, because it was, people here don't remember
what the East Bank.
Yeah, it's up until that time, most of the Riverbank Trail was there, and there were plans for the entire loop that we have now. But the trail did not exist between Valley River Center and North Delta Highway. There was an easement for a lot of the road, but a lot of the path, but it had never been built. And the city came up with some money to build it. And we thought, oh, great, we're finally going to get this path. Because at that point, there was only a path on one side of the river, the whole way. And then this gap was missing. And so we thought, great, we're going to get this path built. We got the money. It's good to go. But there were a few parcels. The city had easements for most of it, but there were a few parcels that they didn't own. And some of the property owners along there didn't want a path. It's like every path that's ever been built. They're just afraid of murder and mayhem and all the horrible things that will come from having public access to their property. And it became a crazy thing, really. The main opposition of it came from Marist High School, which is located right along the proposed route of the path, and in fact is right where the path is now. And they were, they felt very threatened by it, and they were bringing up the usual arguments about, all the vandalism and murders and rapes and all horrible things are going to happen along this bike path, and which seemed, actually, it might not seem totally out of the realm of possibility today, but at the time, our bike paths seemed really safe. We didn't have people camping along them and all this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And the leaders of the school and some of the other property owners along there were very well connected and used to getting their ways, frankly. And it was bizarre, because the leaders got this law proposed in the legislature that specifically said that a city cannot acquire property from a private school if the purpose of that acquisition is to build a bike path. I mean, it's like, okay, this is clearly never going to apply to anything except this particular path and this particular school. Yeah. It was bizarre. But, they had lots of lawyers and lots of money, and they actually got it, up to the legislature, and in fact passed by the legislature.
Really?
And so we started kind of rallying the troops. We didn't know what we were doing, but it's like we knew people loved the bike path. Mm-hmm. And so, and this was totally pre-internet, pre-anything. We got a bunch of postcards, and we just set up a table along the bike path by the Greenway Bridge. And we had this map of where everybody's city council, ward was. And so we just, in the space of like 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, we had 600 postcards sent to city council members, urging them, just to show them how important this path was to people using the path. And so that got a strong message to the city council to lobby for it. And then anyway, so it did end up actually passing through the legislature. And so it then was down to the governor who was Governor Kitzhaber at the time. And so we kind of rallied the troops again, and it was totally hokey. We had, we didn't have any, there's no such thing as YouTube, or we had a home movie camera, and we just filmed kids walking along. Do you think there should be an East Bank path? Yeah, I like to ride my bike on the bike path. It was hokey, it was corny, it was crazy. But we sent it up to the governor along with a bunch more postcards, and got some coverage in the Register Guard. And fortunately, the governor refused to sign the bill, and it went through. And it still took a number of years to get the path built. But at any rate, that was the birth of the Eugene Bicycle Coalition.
What year was that about? Was that in the 90s?
Gosh, when was Kitzhaber in office? I don't.
Oh boy!
Yeah, I don't know.
I have to go to the intranets here, but because I remember, I think I do remember in my research on the Bicycle Coalition, or not the Bicycle Coalition, the Bicycle Committee, the City Bicycle Committee, that was formed back in the 70s. And I do remember seeing their 7 a.m. meetings, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting time. I don't think there's any committee now that would meet at 7 a.m.
Oh, medical committees always meet at 7 a.m.
Oh, yeah.
That's the time you can get doctors there.
Oh, interesting. Let's see. Kitzhaber was Oregon's the 35th and 37th governor. When was he? 2015. 95 into 2003. So sometime in that frame.
Yeah,
so I think it was like the mid 90s. It seems like
yeah, probably so.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, and so before that, that got me thinking about the East Bank Path and sort of the advocacy. Oh, Eugene Bicycle Coalition formed in that time. So sometime in the 90s is also when, or the late 80s was when the Bicycle Committee was decommissioned, right?
Yeah, I think it had been maybe 3 or 4 years before this happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to pull this little bit up here. Oops. So I started a little bit of, I have to do a little bit more with this because I just started a little Eugene Bike History timeline, and this is pretty small on here. But it basically looks at sort of some of the early days. The Eugene Bicycle Committee was formed, and the Autzen Bridge was completed in 1970. The Oregon Bike Bill passed in 1971.
Oh, that's Diane Bishop in that picture. That's funny.
Yeah, that's Diane Bishop down there on the left. And then 1975, Eugene Bikeway Master Plan was completed, and that's when the first city bicycle coordinator was hired. And was that Diane was the first, right? Was she the first, or what?
I'm not sure actually. I think it might have been Christine Anderson actually, who then became the director of public works. I'm not sure about that though.
Yeah, I know she was the longest running city bicycle coordinator, but and then 78 the Greenway Bridge opened, 79 the Knickerbocker Bridge opened. I think there's a lot that happened in this the 70s. That was definitely the bike boom.
Well, that's what's amazing to me. I was looking back at some of this history, and from the time the bicycle plan was adopted in 1974. And by 1980, let's see, where did I wrote that? 1981, they had 70 miles of bikeway built. So in less than 10 years, they built by the time I got here in 1988, our bikeway system was substantially the same as it is now. I mean, there've been improvements and little additions, but the basic system was in place, and it was all done in the space of about 10 years.
Yeah, that is what's amazing. The amount of work that happened in those 10 years from 70 to 80 with not only our path system, but the bike lanes. When you look back at the history, and that's where a lot of these, these pictures and quotes come from, are the bike history I think I've got another picture here. Let me see here of this bicycles in cities. The Eugene experience.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen those? Those newsletters
Yeah,
that were published, and those were published in '81, and they're up on the City of Eugene website. So if you Google City of Eugene bike history, that comes up, and there's on that page, the City of Eugene bike history page. Here, I'll actually share that. Boop, and there's some really great pieces. I'm just going to show. So on this bike history page, there's all these articles in the different volumes, and then of course these classic videos of the Ruth Bascom, the bike links, classic 1970s, and we'll maybe show a little clip of that here in a bit. But yeah, these are really an incredible piece of Eugene history. Let's see, I can even show some of those real quick. And they just have some really, and they talk about the forming of the committee, and then there's even some discussion in there that gets into the weeds about how decisions were made on where bike lanes were going to be, what connections there were going to be, how what kind of compromises, and talks about even the first bike lane that was put in Eugene they had to remove parking for. Like they had put in sort of all the low-hanging fruit and put in the bike lanes, and then did parking removal. So
yeah, some issues just never die, but it was interesting, and it one of the things I noticed in there was that when the bicycle committee got started, they had representations from they had staff from Parks Department and Transportation Planning and the traffic engineer and these different departments, and they worked hard, and they did eventually come up with a plan, and they got a lot of public input and stuff from it. But then a few years later, they actually got the department heads of planning and the traffic engineer and department head of the police, and that was when things really started to take off, because and also that these the staff members who were on the committee, initially they might or might not have been bicyclists, but they kind of converted, and once the people on the committee, the department heads on the committee, were themselves bicyclists, things really started to roll.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because our, what was formed in 2008 as the new Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which was the reinstatement of that committee, because like you said, there was this time where there wasn't, that committee was disbanded, and then, there wasn't anything. And I think Eugene Bicycle Coalition sort of stepped in as an advocacy group, but there was nothing within the city. Staff were doing some things, but it wasn't until the Bicycle Pedestrian Strategic Plan said, okay, we need another committee. And so the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee was started in, I think that was 2008. 2008 was a big year when I started to do the history pieces. Just looking back at that timeline, what was it that it showed here? Gears and EBC merged, Safe Routes to School started, U of O bike program started, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee started up. So there's a lot that happened that year. And I think that was, but what's interesting is the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee was all citizen. There were no, they were advisory to staff. So I think that was a different structure than sort of that old bicycle committee.
Yeah. The other thing that they benefited from in the early days was the passage of the Oregon Bike Bill, which was in 1971. Yeah. And especially in the first rendition of the bill, it required that 1% of gas tax revenues be spent on bike ped facilities, and at that point, that could include paths. And so, Eugene already had its projects in the works, and so I don't think many other cities had really thought much. So they didn't really have any projects, shovel-ready projects or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Eugene got more than its fair share of that gas tax revenue, and that's how a good chunk of our riverbank path got built. Was we had bike bill revenue. We could compete because nobody else was competing for it. Right. And a lot of it got built that way. Then in 1981 or something like that, they changed it so that money had to be spent on the right-of-way of roads. So you couldn't build paths with that anymore. But,
right. That happened in 81. Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty amazing what got done. I think as well, the big thing that some people don't realize is that some of the reason that we have those great bridges across the river is because of the partnerships that happen with eWeb and sort of the need to get utilities across the river, and instead of digging them under, putting them across made a lot more sense. And then it was sort of like, well, if we're going to put a big pipe across, why don't we just put a concrete cap over it and make a bridge and allow people walking and biking to be able to use it. And that's how all three, I think, of the Knickerbocker, the Autzen, and the Greenway all had utility connections with them. So
I'm not sure the Greenway did, but the other two certainly did. And we're really lucky that it was eWeb doing this, so it's citizen owned, and it's it's not a public or a private utility, which might have been less interested.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, our bridges across the river are the envy of most communities, really.
Yeah, we're very lucky. So I wanted to throw this one out there just because to talk about the history goes even farther back than what we're talking about in the 70s, and that the United States and the world saw a big bike boom in the 1890s and early 1900s, and Eugene definitely had a piece of that. And then also just a recognition that, even before the settlers, there were native peoples in these lands, and just sort of recognizing the Kalapuya indigenous people. And in the early 2000s, we had the Kalapuya talking stones installed along our riverbank path system. So I encourage people to check those out in the Willamette Natural area. But yeah, just to sort of call out, I loved this picture of, for those who know, the Shelton McMurphy house near the river path, and they're on Skinner's Butte, on the bottom of Skinner's Butte. I thought this is a great picture of Alberta Shelton posing with her bicycle. And then these were just random, it said probably U of O students in a Eugene gallery picture. So, and then I just love this old history book. And I think, this is at the end of, this is also near Shelton McMurphy House, where you can look down Willamette Street there. So that's pretty fun. And then it was also in my timeline at the very top here, I have 1868 was the year that Willie Knickerbocker was born. And so for those who know, the Knickerbocker Bridge was named after Willie Knickerbocker. And in the 1950s, I think, and maybe even earlier, he was sort of a staple in the Eugene pet parade that was going on at the time. And he would lead the pet parade on his fixed gear bike, and was sort of known as the bike mayor of Eugene long ago. And so when that bridge was being put in, someone rallied to name the bridge after him. That was pretty great. So. And then, I think the other thing that's really fascinating to me, besides the infrastructure part, was the history of sort of the bike industry. And last week I had a fun show with Dwan and Len talking about the bike industry in Eugene and bike shops and businesses. And I just love that history from Burley and Bike Friday and Commotion. And I learned in that event on Friday that Hutch's Bicycles dates back to 1927 in Eugene.
Gosh, wow.
Yeah, Yeah. So a long history of biking in Eugene. I think they, at the time, they also sold hardware when they started up, and then became a exclusive bike shop, I think sometime in the 60s or 70s.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing, and I'm sure you noticed it, especially when you were at CAD, is I'm blown away by how many people in Eugene create their own bikes, their own, they rig up their own whatever. I mean, we've got the biggest assortment of weird bikes of any place in the world, I think.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. That was one of the first impressions I had, because my first job was at Peddlers Express. I can't remember, I'm blanking on his name now, one of the first riders of Peddlers Express that I know is in this picture here. It's not Steve. I can't remember. Ted White was there at the time and worked with them. But when I came on, I remember riding around, and you ride so many miles a day, but just riding the paths of Eugene and seeing all the different kinds of bikes. And I have this clear moment in my mind when I was on the Greenway Bridge, and there was a tandem coming towards me. I was behind a recumbent. I was on this cargo bike. There was someone riding a BMX bike. And then, there were several other like standard bikes. And I was just amazed at the diversity of bikes, in that moment. And then like all day that day, because I was so tuned into it, just saw all these different kinds of bikes. And yeah, the crazy creations from, tall bikes to cargo bikes to folding bikes, and just, amazing designs, and the creativity of the Eugene bike industry and just people have been really amazing.
But I don't know if it just occurred to me. Do you remember the old school bus that used to be around and just had bikes piled up on the outside? I mean, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of bikes on, and it was just a fixture around town. I don't even know what the story of it was. Maybe somebody else does, if there's people watching. It was this old beat up school bus, and it was all over the place. I mean, you just see it.
With the bikes piled on top.
With bikes piled on top and behind it and attached to the sides and everywhere. It was, I don't know what the story of it was, but it was amazing.
Yeah, I remember seeing that, but I definitely don't remember the story there. So we do have some folks watching, and I missed one at the beginning, someone asking what year, and Alicia, if you can remember, if we didn't answer what that was, go ahead and ask that again, and I'll see if we can answer what year you were looking for, what thing you were looking for. And then Leah mentioned that she saw some of the Talking Stones just last weekend. If you haven't seen it, you should go with the kids and enjoy it and try and pronounce the words. I know that I led a Nearby Nature bike camp one summer, and that was a really fun part of it, where we would go and look for the Talking Stones and talk about the Kalapuya people and sort of how they use the land around the river, and the food and camas and different pieces. But the Talking Stones were a fun part of that. So, and then Corey Thomas, you know Corey? He's been on leaving comments a couple times, seen a couple of our shows, and he reminds us of some local businesses, and actually have a couple of those business names in my little recap that I did from the show we did last week. I was just amazed. There was some of these that I missed when I originally did it, but just all the different bike businesses that have, from bike shops to builders, and he mentions English Cycles, and especially when Burley was really hopping and they had a lot of people working for them, and then when they sort of shut down and sent their manufacturing abroad, there was a lot of people left who were really great bike builders and fabricators of clothing and seamstresses, and I think they just sort of trickled out into the community and started to do some other really cool things. That's been neat to see.
Mm-hmm. And I hear that the bike businesses are doing great during the coronavirus thing. That people who have time and the roads are quiet, and they're getting out and getting on bikes. So that's great. Go support your local bike shop.
Right. Yeah, we've definitely been hearing that as well. We did a little feature on bike businesses and bike shops, and heard that some a lot of bike shops are doing really well, and I think that, you know, some are struggling, and I think if higher end bike builders or bike shops might be struggling a little bit more because you know, money's tight for some people. But I think as, you know, more kids are home and parents are trying to figure out you know, what to do with them and how to get out, we've definitely been seeing more families out riding, and I think people are trying to tune up their bikes and use it. So it will be interesting to see if we see another bike boom and what we can do to sort of foster and facilitate that. Yeah. On these, you know, we talk a lot about the bike bridges, but I also wanted to highlight that sort of the other side of it, sort of not as sexy and sort of impressive as the bridges, are our underpasses. And, you know, this one right here, that at the bottom right, that leads to the Otson Bridge in the background there. You know, it's such a simple little thing of, you know, cutting a little underpass under railroad tracks, but just makes a world of difference in connectivity, and just how hard it is to do those now, but how important those are. You know, that when those were installed, both that one, the one at Knickerbocker, and, you know, all the ones for the Fern Ridge Path, they're such an important piece to avoid, you know, arterial streets and railroads. And I think that in some communities, and especially when you look at the Netherlands and other communities, those are really the key pieces that make family biking easier. So it'll be interesting to see if we, you know, I think the newest one that I can think of that was built was the one along Coburg Road, after the Ferry Street Bridge to get under MLK. Besides the ones along the I-5 path, those were probably the newest.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one thing I noticed in looking over the history. And I mean, Eugene was really blessed in being, you know, kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of this stuff, because at the time there really weren't a lot of standards about how bikeways should be built, what's, you know, how you design these things. They were making it up as they go along to a large extent. And I think they were very creative, for one thing. I mean, they came up with a number of things that, I mean, even when I was here, I would take people on tours of you know, the bikeways, and they would see we have a bike lane on the left-hand side of the road, and they say, "You can't do that. That's not safe. Not, you know, you're supposed to be on the right." And I said, "Well, it seems to work, you know." And you know, and they looked at the problems with the intersections and said, you know, it's just going to work better to have the lane on the left-hand side of the road. I think people will get used to it. And in fact, they did. And they, you know, for many years on Alder Street, you had a bike lane in each direction and a single direction car lane. You know, you'd never do that. And
Right.
You know, it wasn't ideal, but it worked. You know, you had to be careful, but you always have to be careful riding around the university. There are people kind of going crazy. And it worked. And I really respect the fact that, you know, at that time, there weren't these standards, and there weren't quite the legal considerations. I don't think that I think the city was a little more free to just try stuff. And you know, I mean, sure, the facilities we build now are much better facilities. But there was a lot of, some of these things got built so quick, and they were creative, and they, you know, it were just, it was exciting to be, you know, kind of on the cutting edge of some of this stuff. Same way with those traffic diverters, like if you're riding down Broadway Street, and, you know, that favorite sign of bicyclists, only bicycles can pass through here, you know.
Right.
They put those things in, and if you try to drive a car around there, it's a nuisance. It's a total nuisance to try to get where you're going until you know the route. But it works great for bikes.
Right. Yeah, that whole, you know, the diversion, the do not enter except bicycles, the contraflow lanes, like all those pieces that are really what make our best bikeways. They're, you know, the best bikeways are things that would be, you know, that are so much more difficult to do now, you know. and that I'm sure at the time caused a stir. That I don't think that all of it was so easy to get done, but I definitely think that you're right, that there was a lot more willingness to just try it and see. Yeah.
Well, then Eugene also, to the city's credit, they did a lot of, because they had the plan in place. They acquired easements for places, where they knew that at some point they're going to want to build a bike lane there or a bike path there or whatever. And then it blew me away when they were extending the Fern Ridge path. I think when I moved here, it only went out as far as Bailey Hill-ish, something like that. And then they got some agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers, I think, and some sort of funding came through to actually build it out all the way out to Green Hill Road, where it goes now. And I remember hearing that they needed to build an underpass there. And fortunately, they were able to do that because when West 11th had been paved the last time, or they intentionally raised the level of the road by an extra foot or two, so there would be room, because the water table is very high there. You don't have, it'll flood if you go very low.
Right.
And so they had enough room to build. I mean, the underpass is not super tall. It kind of makes it feel like you got to duck when you go under it, although you don't. But because by planning ahead for some eventual bike path that was going to go under this road, they built the road to accommodate it. It's like, oh my gosh, because that bike path didn't go through for another probably 20 years after they did that road, built that road. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things, like you said, it's the plans were there, and this committee and the city, when they created that first bikeway plan, it took a while for that to happen, and then it took a little while for the pieces to fall into place to actually implement those things. But because there was a plan, and I think that's what's interesting, is that we had Transplan back in the 90s. Transplan was made in the night, was created in the 90s. And there were some bicycle and pedestrian pieces in there, but that was right at the time where there was sort of no more bike committee, and there wasn't a big real bike advocacy community that was super active. And I think that there was a lot less active transportation, bicycle pedestrian pieces in Transplan. And so there was sort of this, not dead time, but a slow time for Eugene and around innovation and doing new and interesting things. And I think that when the new pedestrian and bicycle master plan was created and then integrated into the transportation system plan that we adopted in 2017. So we adopted that transportation system plan as 2017. And now a few years later, we're starting to see the fruition of that. And I think we're starting to see those projects that we envisioned in the pedestrian bicycle master plan start to actually come about. And because what you had just said, that there is this plan and this vision, and so that as projects get built, we can reference that and be like, oh yeah, we need to do this. And that, the clearest example is the 13th Avenue two-way protected bikeway that's being built as we speak. To connect the U of O campus to downtown. And I think that that's going to be one of those pieces that even though we have a two-way bikeway on Alder, a lot of that was already there. Like you said, there was, the contraflow bike lane and all that. But the 13th two-way protected bikeway is really our first, in the core. We also built the two-way protected bikeway out at Amazon. And so I think we're going to start to see more of those kinds of projects. And hopefully, my hope is that with that and sort of the change in times that we have right now, that we might just see that boom. And maybe it won't be, we saw then it was sort of the 70 to 80. Maybe it'll be the 2020 to 2030 that will be that decade of like, oh, wow, that's when things really started to happen in Eugene again.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did sort of rest on our laurels for a while during the, I guess, 90s, because, compared to other places, we had a great bikeway system, and it felt pretty easy to get around. That, in fact, that was one thing I was thinking about as we do this. I mean, we've got, the bike facilities we're building now are, are far beyond anything that was built back, when I came here. And yet I think it's interesting. It was just a different consciousness, I think, because people really didn't worry about safety the way they do now. I mean, let's face it. I grew up, cars had seat belts, but you didn't have, shoulder harnesses came in while I was growing up. There were no airbags, Nobody wore bike helmets when I was growing up. They didn't exist. It wasn't that people didn't care about safety, but it was just not the threat or whatever that people, and so people felt like, oh, a bike lane on the road, that's great. It's so much better than it was before. And so let's go use it, and there's still a part of me that says, people talk about, a bike lane, that's just a stripe of paint on the road. How is that going to protect you from a car? It's like, well, if you're driving your car up 126, what keeps that oncoming driver from running into you? It's a stripe on the road, basically, Sure, if you assume that the driver is out trying to run over you, no, it's not going to protect you. But, so to a certain extent, I wish people weren't so obsessed with safety. Because I think in many cases, it's largely the culture that keeps you safe, the shared understandings that these are shared roads. And I think the more bicycles we get out there, many of our bikeways, and as people get more experience riding, obviously that helps. Because I just wonder whether we're really going to be able to have these protected bikeways that people love and paths everywhere. There's always going to be a time that you have to share the road with a car, and you have to assume that car is not really on a mission to kill you. That you both want to survive the day.
Right. It's definitely, it's an interesting thing, the chicken and the egg of, and just that whole conversation around, vehicular cycling and cycling infrastructure and sort of what will get people out riding and, and I think that the culture shift is a big part of it, right? But does the culture shift come because there's more people riding, and, how do you get more people riding, and sort of how does infrastructure help with that? And I think that bike lanes definitely helped, right? Like that got a lot of people, feeling, or a lot more people feeling comfortable and feeling like, oh, I have some space out here, right? And I can use this bike lane. It's dedicated to me. It has, a stripe of paint, and it has a bike symbol. And then, and so I feel like we got sort of to the maximum number of people that we could with that kind of infrastructure. But you're right. There's this change in mentality about like what is safe, and this feeling this need to feel even more safe. And so sort of this desire for protected bikeways and separated bikeways, and that is really caught fire more than it ever has. And sort of how that is affecting, what people choose to do. And I do agree that, as a big advocate for better bike infrastructure and more protected bikeways, I'm also, a vehicular cyclist and a very confident cyclist, and know that we also have to teach people how to ride in a way that they can get everywhere they want to get, even if there isn't that infrastructure there, because no matter where they go, there's going to be a time where they have to sort of interact and be traffic, and sort of how do you teach people to do that and have good infrastructure so they feel comfortable on most of their ways. And so
well, and that's the other thing that I have noticed in bike advocacy, is that if you could just get people onto their bikes, you don't have to persuade them of anything. The bike persuades them. They all of a sudden they want to do it. They want to find out new places they can go. They want to get, you don't have to sell them on anything after that. If you can just get them on the bike.
Right. Bikes are fun, right? Yeah. It's like you got to get them out there and enjoy that. Related to all of this, Richard asks the status of High and Pearl Street. And so thinking about bike history and infrastructure. So High and Pearl are Sue was talking about the left side bike lanes before, and those are the two streets that we have bike lanes on the left-hand side of the street, and that's two one-way streets that currently connect our Amazon path to the river path. And so right now, if you're on the Amazon path and you want to get down to the river path and vice versa, you have to ride on High or Pearl in the bike lanes. And there is a plan called the Ridgeline to River, where we're looking at how do we connect the Ridgeline sort of trail system to the riverbank path system. Sort of what is our best north-south connector. And so we put in the East Amazon Protected Bikeway as the first part of that, along with the Amazon path. We have a big long stretch that gets you down to 19th Avenue.
And that really cool intersection where you can go diagonal across the intersection.
Yeah, the new diagonal crossing is super fun. But then once you get to 19th, you have to go out onto a regular bike lane. And it's a pretty comfortable road to ride on until you get to 7th, and then you have to do this funny little jog over and get to the right side. But for most of it, it's pretty easy to do. But if you're a new cyclist and you want to feel that path feeling, it's not super comfortable. And so how can we sort of bring the level of that system up to that comfort level of the path while you're on the road? And so we've been going through a process with Central Eugene in Motion to look at different options. And right before COVID hit, we did an analysis of what would it look like if we removed a car travel lane on High Street and put in a two-way protected bikeway along High Street. We also were looking at the possibility of doing a two-way protected bikeway on Pearl, and sort of took that off for a couple different reasons. And then we're also considering one-way protected bikeways, so turning those regular bike lanes into sort of protected bikeways. And so we had to see what would it do to traffic volumes and sort of people's behavior if we were to remove one of those travel lanes and put in a two-way protected bikeway. So that analysis was done. We didn't see a huge change, but we did see some small effects to vehicle traffic, but not very big. And unfortunately, we didn't get official numbers because it was in for a week. And during the second week, we were going to do our counts and our videos and sort of get all the final numbers. And that was right around March 13th, which was when COVID hit strong and everything shut down. So we didn't get those final numbers, but we did do some evaluation beforehand. And so it's working its way through city leadership, and some decision will be made soon about the best way forward. Central Eugene in Motion, which was looking at a lot of different projects, including an 8th Avenue protected bikeway on both sides of that street, and two-way in Willamette Street, and a couple other little pieces, is moving. A lot of those projects are moving forward, including the two-way conversion of Willamette Street. And I'm still hopeful. There's a portion of city staff who are really pushing to have a protected bikeway there, because it really does meet that need of comfortable cycling for families. And we know that if we put in a good facility along that corridor, people are going to feel like it connects well, that or the Amazon path to the river path. So I'm hopeful, and but it's still to be determined. So a long answer to your question, Richard. So I wanted to see who else we had on here. We had Andrea, who's a new rider, and said they've been impressed by the courtesy of the cars. Even in a lane without a designated bike lane, they appreciate the awareness the Eugene area seems to have. What do you think about that, Sue? Do you think that's true? Do you think we have that?
I think that is largely true. I think it depends a little bit on which part of town you live in or travel in the most. South Eugene, Central Eugene, I find very comfortable, very accommodating. if anything, you get in trouble because people are too deferential. It's sort of like, just act normal. That's what's going to be. Don't stop just because you're trying to be polite. Just go.
Right.
Just be a normal driver. But other parts of town are a little less friendly feeling. It's hard to document exactly what, but and the facilities are a little, either that's more cul-de-sacs and either neighborhood streets and then huge arterials. There's not quite the city block type where you have more alternatives. Compared to other cities, yeah, I think it is generally friendly. But there are times and parts of towns that it can still be a little threatening. Franklin Boulevard is not a street that anybody looks forward to riding on or along or crossing, whatever. Highway 99 is, it's a highway.
Right.
And so I think your experience depends a little bit on where you are and what time. From my experience, I work at the hospital, so I'm off the normal 9 to 5 kind of schedule, and so what time of day you're traveling makes a lot of difference too.
Right. Yeah. That 5 o'clock rush hour is certainly the time that I have the most negative interactions. People are rushing to get home, and so definitely haven't had much of that in the past couple months. But
well, and I think too the more people you get who are bicyclists themselves, the safer it's going to be, even when those people are driving cars.
Right.
So I think the more bikes you have on the road, the more people have to accept that, they're going to be here. They are transportation. We ought to, share the space.
Right.
And also when people themselves are bicyclists, they're going to be able to anticipate what the needs of a bicyclist is. And the more predictable the bicyclist can be, the better it is for everybody, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, just to bring it back to some of the bike history pieces, I mentioned in 2008, the Safe Routes to School program was started, and there was definitely work at CAT going on even before that around bike education, and the Bicycle Transportation Alliance had been teaching bike safety education.
Do people know what CAT is, by the way?
Oh yeah, the CAT is the Center for Appropriate Transport. So the Center for Appropriate Transport was started on my timeline here, 92, and so they were doing their mobile school presentations even back in the late 90s, and we're working with the Bicycle Transportation Alliance to do bike safety education along with the River House and City of Eugene in the schools as well back in the 2000s. And so I think even in early 2000 we had some bike safety education going on in the schools. But since 2008, since we've had a formal Safe Routes to School program, we've grown that program to now have about 5 fleets of bikes in Springfield, 4J, and Bethel, and instructors from Willamette Lane and the City of Eugene going in and teaching over 1,000 kids a 9-hour bike safety education course that actually gets them on the road. And so those are kids that, will eventually not necessarily become, avid cyclists necessarily, but they will potentially become drivers and hopefully avid cyclists too. But when they, we always talk about that bike safety education class really being their first driver's ed. And so if we can teach these thousands of kids, safe cycling and what it's like to be out on the road, we're hopefully teaching those new conscious drivers, right? That, they eventually become the drivers in our communities and will understand a little bit more sort of how to interact around people riding bikes. So.
Yeah, the Safe Routes, they do a great job. There's no doubt about it. And they really have branched out into lots of different age groups and skill levels and all that sort of thing. I think the one thing that has been kind of exciting during the COVID crisis is seeing that in the same way that kids or parents are homeschooling with all their math and their English lessons, they're homeschooling the bike safety too. There are lots of parents out with their kids. And I think, that way, in a classroom situation, there's always a lot of distractions that, the kids tend to just follow the other kids, and so they may learn and practice what you want them to do, or they may just kind of be playing, but when they're with their parents, and it's a great education, and I love to see because that's how we all learned how to ride, basically, was
right, just getting out and
yeah.
Yep, definitely. And that's good. I'll use this opportunity to make a quick plug for my old Safe Routes folks. And let me see here. So if you're doing any remote learning and want to take your kids out riding, Safe Routes to School, Eugene Springfield SRTS.org has a great resource going on right now that for whatever grade you're in, and even for 9th to 12th grade, is great for adults. They have a whole curriculum lineup here of learn to ride, how to ride a bicycle in 5 minutes. So from the very basics all the way up to basic bike safety, from fitting a helmet to getting the right bike, doing your safety checks, and hand signals, and how to ride with traffic. So there's some really good resources that they've put together for remote learning. So I just definitely want to plug that for folks, because it has been exciting to see all those families out riding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Back to here. Cool. Let's see if we have any other questions that have come in. I did see earlier that I wanted to highlight something that came in about our bike history of great organizations and businesses that we have locally. And on my slide here with the different bike businesses, Dewan wanted to mention from last week some of our great event organizers, Mike Ripley's Mudslinger events, Claire Terrell's Twilight Operations, because we had talked a little bit about Damsel Tours and sort of businesses based around biking. So not just manufacturing or bike shops, but there's some really great businesses that have bikes in some way, whether it's Pedal Power Music or Hummingbird Wholesale, who use bikes for the distribution, Eugene Pedicab, but there's some pretty cool things that people have done with bikes around Eugene. You think of any others?
Well, and you mentioned some of the clothing people that they're, I don't know, is Jackson and Gibbons or JG, are they still around? They used to make, I've got some of their shorts I still wear that I love.
Oh yeah, JG. I see that name pop up every once in a while, but I'm not sure if are they still building, and were they in Eugene or just outside Eugene somewhere?
I think they were a Eugene business. I'm not sure actually.
And that was another one I didn't put up, was Blue Sky Trailers. Do you remember them?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
They're in Silverton, I think, so a little south of Eugene. But last I checked, they were still building bike trailers as well. So, yeah. Yeah, the spin-offs have been really interesting to see. Speaking of trailers and local bike businesses, I want to mention that anyone who leaves a comment, asks a question on our Transportation Tuesday and our Friday Funtime live stream events is entered into a raffle. So we have some prizes, including from a local bike company, Burley, who makes, of course, these awesome kids trailers. They also make a travois, which we're also going to be raffling off. And so we have a travois and this Burley Encore, and then some gift cards from local bike shops, all part of Maya's Bike Month. So either leave a comment on these shows, or take a picture while you're out riding and tag it with We Bike Lane. We're also going to be looking through the We Bike Lane and entering those folks into a spreadsheet and doing a random number drawing and drawing some fun raffle prizes. So love to see if there's any questions out there, thoughts that people have about Eugene's bike history, questions that they've had, and any other cool bike history you want to talk about. Sue, I had one thought on 13th that I wanted to touch on, but what other thoughts do you have around Eugene bike history?
Oh, I was just actually kind of wondering how you feel, Shane, now that you're on the inside. It's Eugene doesn't really, Eugene at times in the past has had a strong advocacy movement. It doesn't
Mhm.
really have an advocacy group now. I would love
Mhm.
for there to be one. I would sign up in a minute. But I was wondering how you think, what an effective role for advocacy going ahead would be. And how could an advocacy group or movement help the city move ahead faster or more effectively, whatever?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, and I was really glad to hear you bring that up as one of the first things that you talked about with the East Bank path. And it ties into what I was going to talk about on the 13th Avenue piece is, my roots are in advocacy. There's the director of, I forget what her title is, but she's in the Washington Department of Transportation, WashDOT. And she's what she calls herself an advocrat, that she comes from the advocacy world and now works in sort of the bureaucracy, and is an advocrat. And that's definitely where I see myself. I come from the advocacy world, and I do this because I'm passionate about it. And I think that, the more we build cities around cycling and people-focused transportation, that we have better cities. And so I am definitely an advocate for more advocacy. I really feel strongly that we as city employees can only do what we do because leadership guides us, and leadership really hears from the community and listens to what the community wants. And so the more the community asks for something, the more likely it is to happen. I think that there's a lot of examples of that. You mentioned the East Bank path. The example I was going to share about 13th Avenue, there's that section of 13th that goes through campus, and from Kincaid all the way down to really University, but then also that small section to Agate. That section between 13th or between Kincaid and University was originally blockaded by students as part of the protest in the late 60s, early 70s, sort of anti-Vietnam,
the environmental movement.
And the environmental movement, and it was blockaded several times. And there just became a point where the students blockaded it, and then they said, we really don't want cars coming through campus anymore, and they pushed the city and the university to just close that off to cars. And so that was a pure grassroots advocacy effort to close that section of 13th. And I think, and now the two-way protected bikeway that we're building was originally something that a student group said, hey, we really see this need. We're going to do a study. We want to work with you as a city to see how can we connect the campus to downtown. They did a lot of the initial legwork and design and brought that to the city and advocated for and pushed for, getting that two-way protected bikeway in there. Those kinds of things don't happen unless there's community support. I think we're seeing some of that now with slow streets. When COVID hit and some communities were starting to close streets to cars and open them up to people being able to use them walking and biking, some big cities started to implement those. And Portland was one of those that at first PBOT said, no, we just can't, we don't have the time and energy to focus on this. We're sort of in crisis management. But there was a big push from the community and really sort of pounding on the commissioners and really pushing hard. And they finally said, please do something, PBOT, do something in the transportation department so that we don't have to hear this anymore. And they did. They just, boom, 4 days, they came up with a plan. They, implemented a basic system. Whereas we haven't really gotten that, guidance from leadership, and we're doing some of that work because we've heard some things from the community members, and so we're doing it. But there hasn't been this sort of major groundswell. So I definitely think that there's, a need for grassroots. I think that there's some great organizations like Best that's doing some grassroots, but more of grass tops.
Well, and I'm just seeing a plug, give a plug for the Climate Revolutions by Bike Advocacy Group. Yeah. Yes. Which again, and I think in terms of our climate plan, which remember was what we were all talking about before we started talking about COVID. And it's obviously the links between the two are very clear, actually. And we ought to, as we're trying to plan our climate plan, we ought to take advantage of what we have, what we do well, what we have, and bicycle transportation is one of the things that it's the low-hanging fruit. We already do it well. We can do a whole lot more, and should be, a major part of our climate plan.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that I like to highlight this history part is that we do it well because we have a city that's really primed for it. Like we are really a perfect city, in our size and our scope. And, yes, we need a little bit more density and, some pieces to make it better, but really we have the bones to make a great cycling city. Like we could become the #1 cycling city in America very easily. We have the sort of core pieces. And I think that we can do that if we do implement our transportation system plan and but I think we do need that sort of push from city leadership to say like, yes, let's go for it. And the cities that really do that well generally tend to be strong mayoral run cities. And we're just not that, Yeah.
And if you notice back, even when in the history sections of that, the series, it was all started by Eugene had a mayor who was a bicyclist. And that was kind of the impetus behind it.
Yep.
You're right. We don't have the strong mayor form of government that, like we can't just we don't have a mayor who can just say, okay, we're going to build 90 miles of protected bikeways. Do it, But if we, the more, and we've tried in the past to try to get our city council members out on bikes. It's a bit of a struggle, but I think having leaders who are bicyclists would be very helpful.
Yeah, and we do have. I think there are definitely, we have city council members who are very supportive of the work we do, and I think all of our city council is very supportive. But there's a difference also of just having, Ruth Bascom was, really an advocate within, really pushing and leading, and so
Well, and just the leaders can, all these snags and obstacles that staff runs into, if the city, if a strong city councilor or mayor, talks to that property owner and says, this is really important to us. It's like I go on bike rides with you all the time. This needs to happen. So let's make it happen. Okay. There's just things that can make, staff is great and you guys do great work, but you do need leadership. And if citizens can help make that happen, that'd be great. The other thing I'd that we have going for us, this is a different topic, but it's like, okay, electric bikes are another thing that can really make bicycling work for a lot more people than it has in the past. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we ought to take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's gonna be a game changer for sure. I think that we're seeing that already. I just wanted to highlight, someone had mentioned, can we get Lucy out on a bike, our mayor? And I have to say she does ride. She's been out. She's mostly a walker, but just last year we had her on a bike ride with Safe Routes to School, where she rode the East Amazon Protected Bikeway with us. And it was great to ride with her and sort of see the light bulb go off about what a protected bikeway really does and what it means. We were riding along and she just looked back and she was like, this is so great. The cars are right there and I feel totally safe, and we were like riding contraflow, sort of the cars were coming at us in a way, but there's that barrier there. And I think it really was sort of a light bulb moment. And so like having, her out on that ride was really wonderful. And Richard makes a plug. It's a good time for you to start an advocacy organization soon.
Well, I think we need younger blood, frankly. I'd love to be a part of it, but in terms of the way, we got to reach a large percentage of the people who ride bikes now are old people. We need to get the young generation on, and they need to do it in their own way. I'd love to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's why
I also am not very good with all this technical stuff about how you organize things and how you. But
you were great.
I mean, just working with
the maps, right?
Yeah, I mean, but just working with some of the people at Best, some of the students there. I mean, there's a phenomenal pool of talent out there, and a lot of passion too. I mean, Live Move is another group that has a lot of energy and great ideas. So it's hard to base an advocacy group on a U of O student thing just because they keep graduating. But yeah, I mean, we need younger leadership, but I would love to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I think that young leadership and a diverse leadership too. I think that's the big thing. And when I was doing Safe Routes to School and we started doing Kiddical mass rides, I think that there's nothing stronger than youth leadership and having kids, no matter what age, being the ones. I mean, you even said at the beginning too that your little video of the kids saying, oh, I love riding along this path, and like having kids go to council and say this is what I want is so much stronger. Like one kid equals 10 adults any time of the day, asking for something at council. So and bikes are fun and kids love it, and so like getting more of them advocating for it is definitely something I'd love to see more of.
And it's a great safety thing too. You get kids on the bike, traffic just about stops.
Oh yeah.
Nobody wants to hit the kid.
Right. Yeah. There's a great scene. If we have a moment, I am going to try and show that clip of the bike history of Eugene, and I'll see if I can find the clip. There's the clip of kids riding to Roosevelt Middle School, and they're just like all over the street, and it's just like cars are just like, woo, and like nothing slows traffic like crazy kids riding bikes. Someone threw up this link, did the little search for us. JNG is still around, and at least they have a website presence, so you can still order. Do they make a rain cape? I think I did.
Poncho, yeah.
The rain poncho, yeah. I'm a big rain cape advocate. If anyone's seen any other shows, I think I've mentioned it almost every show. Big advocate of rain capes. So, and then there was some other question. Alpha asks about Safe Routes to School partnering with Driver's Ed in our high schools. I think that's a great idea. I know that they haven't done a whole lot in high schools yet, but that's definitely be a good question. And then Alpha asks another question. This is one I was looking for, just about the Travois that we're going to be raffling off. Does it attach to a Boda or a Big Dummy, which are both cargo bikes with longer tail, long extensions on the back? And they do. There's a special attachment that you can get for the Travois that attaches to a rack. And so you can attach it to a bike rack. And I think that attachment will also, you can sort of jerry rig that to go on to some of those long tail bikes. So I'm going to see, Sue, do you have any other good historical pieces while I go to look up this video? Because I want to show a clip of these because they're so fun.
Oh gosh, I don't know. It's just it's striking to me when you talk about the old days. It's sort of like old days. Well, hell, that was just 2000 for God's sake. I mean, it's we talk about way back when they're in the days of transplant. It's sort of like, huh?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I was born here in Eugene, and so I did ride. I learned to ride a bike in the Whitaker neighborhood on North Clark Street in '76. I was 4 years old, just to date myself. And the riverbank path was there. I was near the Greenway Bike Bridge, and it was that was a great place to ride as a kid, like to ride around that neighborhood, but then to have the riverbank path and then all the little dirt trails that were alongside it. That was pretty cool. I did find a bag of deer parts one day, like just randomly, like in a garbage bag. I don't know, like someone had like killed a deer or something that were just like hooves and legs, and it was like one of those weird discoveries on the river path system. Let's see, I'm gonna try and see if I can get this to go with a cool, I'm just gonna jump in the middle of one of these videos and see if we can pull this up and sort of. So this is from Ruth Bascom, The Bike Links, the 1972 film. I guess I will go back to the beginning. The quality is not great on it, but there's just some great pieces in here. And just like the quality of this and just the style with the with the cards and like the production value is so awesome.
They are safe streets to move people on bicycles to places they want to go. Bike links are networks of streets and paths bringing people to the central city. They link a man to his place of work. They link shoppers to shopping centers. They connect businesses and neighborhoods. They link people to parks. Bike links should connect schools, like Thurston High School, with the students who live nearby. Bike links, represented by red lines on these maps, show where connecting streets and paths are needed, moving people safely.
Pre-cargo bike.
Bicycles. In our area, separate paths along the river can provide bike links of beauty and utility. Sometimes bikes may use quiet side streets. In other places, the bike link network will require special lanes on busy arterials to separate safely.
Jeez. Kamikaze bicyclists.
the chaos is.
Yet, a bike link network in our area is a dream and not a reality.
It just goes to show you the progress we've made in some areas. Oh, I think this might be, this is this spot, the one I wanted.
Even with obvious dangers, more people are choosing to ride bicycles. On this stretch of road leading to Madison Junior High
Madison.
School, the bike population is very high. Students who a few years ago were walking or being brought by their parents or were riding the school bus are riding bicycles. But the car, bus, pedestrian, bike conflict is serious along the narrow roads that serve some of our schools. The 1971 Oregon legislature passed House Bill 1700, the bicycle bill, requiring that 1% of highway expenditures be for bicycle.
Oh, Stingray. Yeah, I used to have a Stingray.
Yeah.
With this money, we could, in critical areas, provide car and bike separation, as done in Davis, California.
This is what I love. So this is in Davis, and this was in the 1970s. This is a protected bikeway, which is something that is, now seen as this new revolutionary thing. This was actually in the Federal Highway Administration manual for a couple of years, but was really pushed out because of vehicular cyclists and people who didn't want people on bikes to have separate facilities, that we should be welcome everywhere. It was felt like it was a separate but unequal space. Like we'd push them off to the side and we'll give them this little space. And the advocates at the time, John Forster being sort of the champion on that front, really pushed hard for not having these separated facilities. Interesting.
At Roosevelt Junior High,
oh, this was the Roosevelt one.
Half of the students ride bikes. Students there made traffic counts on the streets feeding the school, and they plan to ask their city council for a bike-only lane with daytime car parking prohibition on one street near the school. Sometimes when streets are narrow, as this one is, sidewalks might be widened and used for bicycles. This curb cut used in Davis, California, facilitates sidewalk use. At this west entrance to the
There's
university
13th.
campus, during a regular class day, over 400 bicycles each hour went through this closed to cars intersection. On the street leading to this intersection, some plan needs to be made to better accommodate bicycles. Perhaps there could be a bicycle corridor.
So I just want to highlight that.
Yeah, yeah, maybe there could be.
Maybe there could be a corridor right along here that leads to, say, downtown.
Yeah.
That's what's amazing is, this was in 1970s and we are now building that, but must say that there was an interim time between this and what we're putting in now that made this a lot better. That was a contraflow bike lane that was put in along there that allows you to ride your bike contraflow up to Hilliard and then get onto 12th Avenue.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
well, it's interesting though, because I mean, gosh, the number of bikes there were going to those schools, it's like, and it's astonishing, really.
Yeah, this is amazing.
And it's like, even though we had good bike, well, that's what makes me a little nervous about relying on infrastructure as the key, because they didn't have infrastructure and yet they had lots of bicyclists, and that, that was kind of what made the infrastructure possible. So I hope that we can go in reverse, that build the infrastructure and get the bicyclists, but I hope that's true. I'm not sure.
It is. It's really interesting because, Roosevelt is close to my heart. My brother went to Roosevelt. I moved away from Eugene for a little while during middle school and didn't go to any middle school in Eugene. But when I came back and started Safe Routes to School, we started that program at Roosevelt. And when I saw this movie, and I was just like, look at all those bikes. And at the time, ridership at Roosevelt was pretty low. I mean, we had maybe, I think when I started, we had 25, 30 kids riding bikes there, and it would maybe peak at 50. But by the time I left, we had over 100 kids that would ride regularly there. And part of it was we improved the infrastructure. We covered the bike parking. We improved the bike parking. And then when we built the new school, we put in all covered and all up front and all really good bike parking. And I think their numbers are still holding pretty steady. We also just really changed the environment around the school. But yeah, that culture shift piece of safety that you mentioned, and whether people feel safe letting their kids ride, but the more kids who ride, the safer people feel, and sort of that, what is that magic sauce of infrastructure and culture change and sort of encouragement and education to make it all happen, right? So
yeah, and I work in the ICU, and I can swear, I can tell you that cars are a lot more dangerous than bicycles. I mean, the patients we see who have been in car crashes are way worse off than the occasional bike injury we get.
Yeah.
So people feel so safe in their cars, but
that's it. Yeah, that's a good point.
We're
going to show. There we go. Automobiles. There's some great footage somewhere in here, I think, of Valley River Center and sort of looking at that connection and sort of the change downtown.
Yeah. Well, in fact, that was one thing I was wondering, actually, was, the Owasso Bridge was built, but the river path wasn't on that side of the river yet. So what did the Owasso Bridge go to?
That is a good question. I was wondering that same thing. I know that the West Bank path went up to that, right?
Yeah.
And then it crossed, but then did it connect it over to the Delta or that?
Yeah, I don't. it must have somehow gotten over to Goodpasture Island or something, but I
Goodpasture
really
Island,
don't
yeah.
remember. It's like, why would you build a bike bridge there when
Right.
there wasn't anything to go to?
Yeah,
I
I feel
honestly
like
don't
that was,
remember.
I think that was one of those things, like you said, that it was.
There was eventually going to be a bike path
right.
there.
There was
Yeah.
eventually, it was in the plan, and it was a utility crossing that was probably going to happen. And so I think they just said, oh, we should, put this in and we'll get there. You know where this is?
To the southern part of our city.
Oh, I think this is Amazon.
Item in next year's proposed
Maybe.
city budget to build such a bike trail. The proposed budget also allocates funds for white paint to.
Yeah, I think that was it. Oh, it goes to the. So these two movies, for anyone who's watching still that hasn't seen these, I highly recommend them. They're on the City of Eugene website, and they're just really fun historical pieces. There's some really great footage in here of the early days of the Autzen Bridge being in, but not having access underneath to actually get to it. So people were walking over the railroad tracks, and I think there's even a picture of then Mayor Ruth Bascom doing that, like carrying her bike over the railroad tracks to get to the bridge. And yeah, there's just some really great classic footage in here. So I definitely encourage folks to check it out. And I think they're also on our YouTube channel now. Encourage folks to check those out. So, whoops. There we go. All right.
Oh, and Alpha is saying when they redeveloped West 11th for the MX, they didn't include any bicycle infrastructure on West 11th itself.
It's true. I think, yeah. There were some major pedestrian improvements, and then there definitely were some new connections that happened, like bridges over the Fern Ridge Path, or over the Fern Ridge Creek there, and then at Commerce Street, those two bridges there. But yeah, not on West 11 itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as I recall, I mean, I think the feedback from most, even bicyclists, was that people are not going to ride on West 11th, even if you have a bike lane there. That it's too busy a road, which is interesting because that same thing was said for many, many years on West 13th from say Chambers to downtown. It's like, why? I mean, they would say, the bike path is just a few blocks south of there. Nobody wants to ride on 13th. You can't build a bike lane there. And that's a wonderful bike lane. I love that bike lane on West 13th. So
yeah, I know. I'll often get off the Amazon path to get onto that 13th one because it's a great bike lane.
Easy, straight, traffic. It's and
it's pretty, it's not that busy. There aren't, the cars that are there. It feels pretty safe. So yeah, but as Alpha mentions, but it still is. It means that you still can't access the businesses. So even if you aren't going to use it as a corridor, like you still will want to be on 11th for some amount of time.
Yeah, and it's a problem we have, on West 11th, using the Fern Ridge Path as well as on the Riverbank Trail. It's like you have to know where to get off the trail to get to the business you're trying to get to, and that last quarter mile can be kind of hairy sometimes. And if you guess wrong, then the cost of it is is horrible because then you're stuck on West 11th or you're stuck on Riverbank.
The other good, classic one is Franklin Boulevard. You mentioned before, and that's a really horrible street. And we just wrote a big build grant to make some improvements on Franklin from I-5 to Alder. So that whole section that's right by the University of Oregon, which is just notorious as being a horrible street to bike on. But there's some major pieces in that has the potential of making that a much better street. For people to walk and bike, and of course, MX, that's one of the biggest MX corridors, to make that even better. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that design and that project. So, because there's planning involved, and I think with MX, West MX especially, that was a really transit focused project, and there were some improvements that happened for pedestrians. I think that the Franklin project that we're working on is really a people-focused one, really focused on how are people moving through here in all sorts of ways. And so MX is an important part of it, but people walking and crossing it from the university and just the new campus and all those interactions, the businesses that are along there. I think there's so much more that's tied into that than there was at West 11th, even though I think West 11th is a really important corridor because of all the business and transitory development and all the potential that was there. That was an LTD project that, you know, really ran the show. And I think that with Franklin, I'm really hopeful that we've got some pretty exciting things that we can do in that project.
Yeah, and the other thing that has been an issue as long as I've been involved in bike advocacy in Eugene is that it's hard to get a unified voice representing cyclists. And as soon as one group says, this is what we want, there'll be another group that comes up and says, what are you talking about? I would never use that. I would never ride there. I would never, you know, and it's, if we could somehow come up with a unified voice that is at least, you know, represents enough people and is credible and is not yelling and calling names and that kind of stuff, you know, it would be really helpful to, you know, because and city staff actually does a good job of representing the views of bicyclists. But I think if we could, as citizens, if we could come up with a, you know, a respectable, positive, constructive, and reasonably unified voice, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like you said, that's, you know, that was what got a lot of the things done in the past, and we can learn from that history. So I think that's a great note to end on. We're at 7, and so we'll wrap this up. Thanks everyone who left comments and tuned in. We are hoping to do some other Transportation Tuesday events continuing on. We are going to be live streaming our Active Transportation Committee sessions as well, so you can find those on our YouTube or Facebook pages. We are wrapping up May is Bike Month, but lots of great rides to be had all over Eugene on your own in safe social distance. We just posted last week a mural bike tour that I encourage people to go out and experience. There's a little PDF that you can print out that shows a map and all the different murals that you can see in both Eugene and Springfield. So it's a great thing to do over the weekend as a family or on your own. And yes, Alpha, you get lots of entries for all those comments. Thanks for joining us tonight, and stay tuned to our Facebook and YouTube channels. Send us any questions or comments and any other any show topics you'd like to discuss, and we'd be happy to try and get those up. Thanks, Sue, for joining me and talking Eugene bike history.
Yeah, thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.